It's the Believe in Texans podcast brought to you by FanDuel, where we're still mourning the preseason game loss to the LA Chargers. I almost said two fake things there. One, that we're mourning a preseason loss. Two, that it was to the LA Chargers. I almost said San Diego. I'm going to keep doing that for the next 30 years of my life if I live that long. Preseason game results you try not to worry about, but how did you get to the result? There was a lot to be happy about after that game, and I actually left feeling better about the offensive line after watching the All-22 and more concerned about the backup defensive players than I had been immediately after the game. And DeMeco, I think, felt the same way. This was DeMeco on Saturday talking about what he said to the team after the loss.
To most of our guys was we got to pick it up, and from a play style standpoint of how we're swarming to the football, like how we're finishing on the football. I thought Chargers ran the ball efficiently versus us, and they were very effective of knocking us off the ball. We didn't finish the right way, and I feel like we left a lot out there, especially on the defensive side and offense in the second half. It was too many 3-and-outs. We didn't sustain any drives. So for all of our guys who played, it was not good enough, and we got a lot to improve upon. So I told them too, and that's the starting point, right? And you can only go up from what we displayed on Thursday night. We can only get better and grow from it, and our guys have already shown they've taken those steps today.
So I think with DeMeco, it's typically if he's really upset about swarming to the ball, for instance, he's talking about the defensive side of the ball. And I think that was probably the bigger letdown to him. And for me, not speaking for DeMeco, I felt better about the offensive performance in the first half than I did about the defensive performance in the first half. When I'm looking at through the lens of, okay, who are these guys out here right now who have a realistic chance of playing this year? And if they go in and play, will the Texans be able to keep churning along? And I've got more reason for concern on the defensive side right now than the offensive side. Let's start with the offense, and I'll move to the defense, and we'll talk about the rookies in general and how they fared and how they're looking right now in camp. But offensively, first of all, you start off with a 12-play drive with the starting offensive line for the night out there. The Cole Popovich, the offensive line coach, made the point the other day of saying, hey, those were the guys who started, but it's still an open competition, and we don't know who all the starters are going to be versus Buffalo, where the Texans right now are still 1.5-point underdogs at Reliance Stadium. I'm still insulted by that, but on FanDuel, it's plus 1.5 for the Texans, and I don't think anything the Bills or the Texans do in the preseason is probably going to change that, barring injuries and what have you. We get to see C.J. Stroud versus the Raiders. DeMeco said that all the healthy players are going to play out in the preseason game number 2, but for the offensive line, that 12-play drive, I thought the offensive line played well. I think they saw some blitzes they didn't expect to see. The Chargers were blitzing pretty aggressively for a preseason game, maybe because the Texans opened up the game with an end around. I'm thinking of that new defensive coordinator for the Chargers said, oh, okay, that's how it's going to be, huh? O'Leary, I think his name is, that they threw some blitzes, not just at the starting offensive line, but when you start throwing blitzes at the second and third stringers and the rookies, and all of a sudden Louis Bond's out there trying to pick up a blitzer in his first NFL game, I'm still a little bit old school in that regard. I'd like teams to keep it vanilla and make it about the physical matchups. But the encouraging thing is I think the Texans, by and large, did a pretty good job of handling the blitz when it was those first and second string offensive linemen out there in the first half. And I thought they got good movement in the run game. The one downside, though, is that on that second drive, the Texans were getting good movement. I thought they were doing the combo blocks well. I thought guys were handling their individual blocks. It's when they got down into the red zone that everything just kind of dried up, and that was disappointing. I mean, you can't convert a 4th and 1 QB sneak. That's like the easiest play in football to convert. Tom Brady was an incredible rushing quarterback as long as it was rushing for 1.5 yards on a QB sneak. Some of that on that play I would put on Mertz. I think not necessarily being able to find the soft spot on the offensive line on that QB sneak, but the fact that they're in 4th and 1 at all is partly because they weren't able to run the ball effectively down in the red zone. But if you looked at the starting offensive line, I think Ursary, who's had some dicey moments in camp, by and large, I was pretty happy with him. I think that Wyatt Teller was just fine. Keylan Rutledge has been awesome as a rookie center, and I think has a chance to be an outstanding offensive lineman. There's a chance that he starts the season at left guard, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Now we might as well get into it now. There's been a lot of shuffling around at practice this week, and I think the old thing that they always say is they want to put the 5 best guys out there. I am wondering if maybe Wyatt Teller or Braden Smith are having a hard time adjusting to exactly how Cole Popovich wants things coached. DeMeco brought this up a week ago or so about how for veteran offensive linemen, sometimes it's difficult when you come into a system and you've done it your way for a long, long time. Now you got to do it a different way. And I know the tendency is to think, well, God, the guy, if it's working for him, why not? It's because it's more than just one individual. When you're run blocking, when you're pass protecting, everybody's got to be running the same system and operating the same way. And sometimes it can be hard to teach that old dog new tricks. So for whatever reason, Wyatt Teller's been getting some work with the 2s, and Rutledge has been working at guard. Ed Ingram hasn't had the best camp so far. If you guys listen to Cody and Landry, you know that for sure, because those guys have really pointed it out, and accurately so. This is where I'm holding something in reserve with Ed Ingram. Ed Ingram is very aggressive as a run blocker. He's also very aggressive in pass protection. Sometimes that's what hurts him in pass protection, is he's a little overly aggressive. He'll take short sets against superior athletes like Chris Jones. And when you do that, if it doesn't work, you get beat, and you get beat fast. It's not just like a slow, oh no, I got driven back into the quarterback. I'm holding open the possibility that he's working on some things right now. And when an offensive lineman tries to change his technique up a little bit, it's kind of like changing your golf swing. It's not always so smooth at first. So that's what I'm telling myself, at least until we see these guys out there versus more opponents in the preseason than obviously in the regular season. And then at right tackle, I think Braden Smith and Trent Brown is a genuine competition. Blake Fisher would come in and get work at left tackle, left tackle when they came in with their second group. And I think he's improved a lot. I think there's still a little bit of a strength deficit. Moves really well, but he's played a lot better. I think he's very much got a very good chance of making the team. It's just a matter of just exactly how much would they use him in what capacity. He looks like he's transformed his body, and I think he looks as comfortable as I've seen him in a long time. If we go to the defensive side of the ball, I think this is where there were a few things that jumped out at me. Texans are at a 9.5 on FanDuel right now for their win totals. I see no reason to question that, despite what I'm just about to tell you about the backup defensive players, but pretty much an entire cast of backups. I don't think there was a single starter who started for that game, correct? You guys correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but first one, I'll just move from front to back. DeMeco mentioned getting knocked off the ball. Yeah, I think the defensive line, at times, some of those guys like Solomon Byrd right off the bat was playing very aggressively and very stout versus the run. There were some moments with the defensive line, including Kayden McDonald, where things weren't so hot, things weren't so pretty. Guys were either getting knocked off the ball, they were losing their leverage, they were creating scenes. It wasn't the kind of effort I want to see out of those guys. But also it wasn't Mario. The backup defensive lineman right now would be defensive tackles would be Logan Hall and Mario Edwards. And those guys are way better than what we saw from the guys who are out on the field. Kayden McDonald right now is maybe like the 5th or 6th best defensive tackle in that group. Maybe he's got a way to go. And I'm not down on him. It's just, he's working on a lot of stuff and he can soak up space and everything, but not as effectively as some of those other guys who are smaller than him and, didn't get drafted in the second round by the Texans. But the pass rush, aside from just getting knocked back versus the run at times, the pass rush after that first series really was pretty much non-existent. And the thing that probably frustrated DeMeco, it's not necessarily that guys weren't winning their one-on-ones in the pass rush. It's that they weren't winning their one-on-ones and they were letting Trey Lance out of the pocket. So there were breakdowns in discipline from the edge rushers, from the defensive tackles at times where they were getting out of their lanes. And that's really unacceptable in DeMeco's mind. That's why there's some good pass rushers who were on this team when DeMeco first got here who are no longer on this team, partly because they weren't disciplined pass rushers. They weren't concerned with unselfishly creating a really tight pocket. For a guy like Trey Lance especially, but my goodness, I can't believe the 49ers gave up as much as they did for him. Because boy, he cannot play. Boy, he is stiff. Like he's athletic and everything, but as a thrower of the football and the way he operates, he's stiff, and you're letting him buy time and get out of the pocket. It's not like he had a great day or anything. But it wasn't that wasn't what DeMeco likes to see, partly because it's a breakdown in discipline. The other big thing was that the cornerbacks weren't coming up and playing the run aggressively, consistently. That's a hallmark of this defense. Kamari Lassiter is the poster child for a cornerback who's great in coverage, but man, does he love come up and playing the run. And those guys were just too passive at times. So you'll see some cornerbacks that had a couple tackles on the day, but they were for 5 or 6 yard gains. And on first down, especially, you let up a run like that where a cornerback could have snuffed the run out on first down and made it 2nd and 10, but now you're sitting at 2nd and 6. It's a lot harder to play defense, obviously, when you're in 2nd and 6 and 3rd and 2 because you couldn't handle coming up and playing the run on first down. The linebackers, the linebackers, I was honestly kind of shocked at how passively they played. And I think Wade Woodaz and Marte Mapu, I'm optimistic that this week it's going to look better. I think there's times where in a new defense, and then when Wade Woodaz is a rookie especially, they're sitting back and they're trying to be certain about their keys, their run-pass keys, and they just waited too long to pull the trigger when they identified that it was run and come up and see and do what we've seen Azeez Al-Shaair, Henry To'oTo'o, and EJ Speed do versus the run. That's my advice to rookies always. Is that there's two things. You gotta separate your preparation for a preseason game into 2 levels. There's one which is you got to know the playbook. That's like the simplest advice. That's the most important advice for rookies. Know the playbook, know where to line up, do all those things before the snap. But once the ball is snapped, listen, you're going to make mistakes. But what coaches want to see is they want to see you show up. So, all right, maybe a bite on a play action once or twice. But there's another couple times where you come up and plant a running back on his butt 3 yards deep in the backfield. They like seeing that. Every coach in the world thinks he can coach you out of the other stuff. You gotta remember, these coaches, they're in the NFL for a reason, and it's not a lack of confidence. They feel like we can teach them the things that they need to teach. We need to teach them, but I don't know if I can teach them to be an aggressive mofo that just comes up and tries to destroy people. So if you have to err on the side of aggression, and that's not what those guys were doing out there. So Hummel had a couple nice plays, but as a group, they were just way too passive for my liking. And I think that's probably going to, like, when DeMeco coaches something with a lot of intensity, he tends to get it. And I think we'll be okay with that. The other thing, the crack blocks. So this is just a general lack of awareness. Whenever you see a defensive end getting blocked by a wide receiver, it's because he wasn't aware that a receiver was in a crack position. There's 2 things that go into that. One is the defensive end himself should be aware of it when he can, especially if the receiver lines up just outside of him. And the other, though, is when a receiver motions down towards the defensive end, he's got to be getting a crack call from the defensive backs. They're alerting the defensive end that he might be getting blindsided. And there were just multiple instances in that game of guys getting cracked and basically taken out of the play by a wide receiver. That's frustrating if you're DeMeco, because unless it's a rookie defensive end, that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen routinely and consistently, and it did. So this is what I found myself thinking during that game. I kept thinking, okay, if 2 or 3 guys get injured, these are the guys who are going to screw it up for everybody. Like, you're not allowed to just think, okay, because I'm wearing a Texans jersey and a Texans helmet, then I'm a badass defender. Because they weren't playing it like it. They weren't coming up and supporting the run consistently. Some guys were, but not everybody. Shout out to Kamari Ramsey, who had a hell of a game by the eyeball test. And then if you look at Pro Football Focus, he may have graded out as the highest graded Texans player. And DeMeco is very positive in his appraisal of Kamari Ramsey after having watched the film and gone through all of that. Jalen Smith made a nice play up against the run early on. It's not like nobody did anything good in that game. It just flat out wasn't up to DeMeco Ryans standards. So coming up next, let's talk about the rookies and where they stand after this preseason game. So as we sit here after preseason game number 1, the Texans are 17-1 to win the Super Bowl right now on FanDuel. Those are the 8th shortest odds. At some point this offseason, they were the 9th shortest odds. So a little bit of movement there. And I think probably some of the additions on defense, including the addition of Jadeveon Clowney, probably helped out in that regard. A lot of positive reports about Woody Marks and Jaden Higgins and these other players. But how are the rookies doing? And it's not going to come as a surprise to any of you that Keylan Rutledge is still very highly regarded. I have yet to find anything but gushing praise by anybody on the team, whether it's a coach or a player, when asked about Keylan Rutledge. I was talking to Jerry Shaplinski the other day, the quarterback's coach, and I just kind of brought up, after I was done interviewing him, I just kind of brought up Rutledge's name, and his eyes just kind of lit up. Like these guys really like Rutledge. Rutledge is doing very well. I think that, as we talked about earlier, there's a chance that he could start out the season at guard. I'm not concerned about whether he's at guard or whether he's at center. He seems like he is dialed in and as focused as any rookie I've ever seen. You can see he's got a really serious demeanor, but we've seen in interviews since he got here that he can loosen up too. But what they'll say about him is just, man, he's always studying. He's always talking to the veterans. He's figuring out exactly what he needs to do at center, especially, and making the calls and understanding the mental part of it. He's snapping the ball to his wife 150 times a night. Only shotgun. Not if she went hands under center, that ball comes back there pretty fast. He probably doesn't want to injure his wife. So he's a gentleman. He's not going to break his wife's knuckle with a football, with the old Duke. Kayden McDonald, second round. Kayden's a work in progress. Kayden is working on his pad level. He's working on getting his hands better. And to me also, I feel like he might not be quite in the same condition that he was when he was in college. And this is not me calling him fat or he came in out of shape or anything. Sometimes guys get into the NFL and they think they need to be a little heavier than they actually need to be because it's the NFL and that's the perception. But for whatever reason, it just doesn't feel to me like he's moving as well as when I watch his college film. And there's some things he's got to figure out with his hands where, in college, when you are just flat out stronger than everybody else, you can get away with not having great technique. In the NFL, if he wants to be what he's capable of being, he's got to be a guy who's lethal with his hands, like a martial artist. And then he can use all that strength he has. But if you don't get your hands placed right and extend it out, these NFL offensive linemen just take you wherever they want to, because you just don't, without your arms extended and without that inside control, you don't have any control on the player himself. Saw some good things from him in the game. But I think as of right now, if they had to play a regular season game tomorrow, I don't know if he'd be active on game day. I'm not freaking out about it. I'm not even criticizing him, really. I'm just talking about the things that he needs to work on to really take advantage of all that innate talent that he has and that size and that strength. He's just got a few more steps. And this is typical for defensive tackle is a way more technical position than people would think or realize. And he's got to work on some of these technical things, and it might just click for him at some point. But he's not nearly as far along on the curve as Keylan Rutledge is, nor Marlin Klein. Marlin Klein is doing very well. And most of you guys already know this, but Marlin Klein, the tight end out of Michigan, Texans largely widely panned for this pick because people thought it was a reach. He's big, he's strong, he's got a huge catch radius, and he knows how to use it. He gets open down the seam, he gets open on drag routes across the middle, and he does that at times against the Texans' first string defense. I am very high on Marlin Klein. I was as skeptical of him as anybody, including through OTAs, because he really couldn't participate. He had this hamstring injury, but he just keeps getting better and better. And I think it's pretty notable that he played the first quarter the other night while all the other tight ends continue to play on into the second half. So they're looking at him as a guy who's probably going to be, they're already looking at him as a day one contributor in the regular season. Weewoo. So Febechi Weewoo, round 4, offensive guard, saw some good things out of him the other night. There were a couple missed blocks that I'm not overly concerned about, and they weren't egregiously bad. When he shows up with his technique and with his strength, He's potentially a very solid player. I don't know what his upside is or his ceiling is, but I think he's a guy that's steadily gotten a little bit more consistent throughout camp, and I think there's a lot of potential there. He's a guy that might be 25% better by the third preseason game. Those guys that just as offensive linemen, I've told you guys before, every offensive lineman in the entire league, their first day of practice, they're not so hot. And then some of them progress really, really rapidly. Some of them, it takes a while. Dwayne Brown, it took 3 years really for it to click for him. But Wee Woo, so far, I think he's on the right track, and I think he might earn some playing time this year. Wade Woodaz, the linebacker out of Clemson, another fourth rounder. He was a bit of a disappointment to me the other night just because of everything I talked about earlier with the way the linebackers were kind of sitting back and catching blocks. Woodaz would be 100% the guy I would say, listen, man, don't go out there in a preseason game trying to be perfect in diagnosing play action. You're going to make some mistakes. Come up and make a play. Come up and hit somebody. All right. If you screw up your coverage responsibilities once, as long as it's not because you didn't know the playbook, and I don't think that's been an issue at all. But mistakes happen in the course of play. If it's aggressive football play, that's what they want to see out of you. The pass coverage stuff, I see the potential for it, but it's got to come with playing a DeMeco Ryans style of football. It'll be interesting to see him. I think he's one of these guys I expect to take a big leap forward in the second week, and because he's gonna get coached really hard. And by all accounts, he's the right kind of kid. He's going to accept the coaching. Fifth rounder Kamari Ramsey might have had the best game of any rookie because he got a lot of playing time and did some good things with it. Could have had 2 interceptions, but did have at least one, or did have one, obviously. And I think the biggest thing about Kamari Ramsey is I feared this would happen. I felt like I was, when you're watching practice and you can't watch all 11, there's always a few guys that are having a good camp, but they're not necessarily making huge plays. But the guys who get all attention are the guys who are making the big plays. Sometimes those guys are also making a lot of mental errors too, but we see the big plays. It catches your eye. For whatever it's worth on Pro Football Focus, he was the highest graded Texan on the day on 27 snaps. So it wasn't all that small of a sample size, but he had a 94.8 grade in coverage. Jalen Reed was second. Overall grade, Dominic Robinson, then Elijah Huzzy, Brandon Codrington. I don't like to lean too much, if at all, on Pro Football Focus grades, but in the preseason where you're sorting out so many players, it's a good way to do a little bit of shorthand. Colin Wright, on the other hand, was the lowest graded player on defense. I think that some of his bad plays, they weren't like the most egregiously bad plays that I don't think he'll ever recover from him or anything like that. But it was maybe a little bit of a welcome to the NFL moment. I know I skipped down past a few draft picks, but since we're on the topic of cornerbacks, I'm still very bullish on Colin Wright. He does totally know his playbook. We've seen that he's capable of making plays. He was one of those guys where at least once I noticed in the run game, he was a little too passive and coming up and stuffing it at the line of scrimmage. And that gets back into what we were talking about, same as with the linebackers. Sometimes, man, you just got to let it go. You're going to make some errors. You're going to make some mistakes. But as long as they're aggressive errors in the course of a play after the snap and before the whistle, coaches will forgive those a lot faster than they'll forgive just an absence of aggressive play. And I think he's 100% got it in him. This is where the first preseason game is fun because you do see some guys come back and really respond after they get coached up. Lewis Bond, I'm still very, very bullish on. I think it's just a question of, all right, where's the opportunity and when are we going to see him? I think he's done enough already that they probably don't want to risk losing him. If you send somebody to the practice squad, that means the rest of the league can have a crack at him. You got to waive him, hope that another team doesn't pick them off of waivers. Then you put them on the practice squad. But even when they're on the practice squad, they're basically free agents. Any other team in the league can come in and try to sign a guy off your practice squad. You've got the right of first refusal unless they've changed that. And then Aiden Fisher, I saw some promising things out of the linebacker out of Indiana. Ever heard of him? National championship. And I saw some good things. I saw the biggest thing, though, too, is that I did see, his lack of just overall speed. It was one play where he tried to pick up the running back out of the backfield, and it was just there wasn't a chance in hell he was going to get to him. Guys can make up for that. Guys can guys can do it with knowing the angles and everything, and you can tell his football IQ and his linebacker instincts are very, very good. Some of the plays that he made, I felt like, okay, that looks like a linebacker. I think he's got a real good chance of being on the practice squad. The undrafted rookie free agents, just off the top of my head, that I would want to talk about, Whittington. I thought Whittington was really impressive for an undrafted rookie free agent in his first NFL game. I liked him a lot. Pitzenberger, I wasn't as impressed with. He's injured. He's on the IR now, so he's not part of the conversation. Owen Wright, who the Texans just picked up last week, the running back, I actually thought that he did a good job at times picking up the blitz. He wasn't necessarily physical enough in attacking it and in the actual pass blocking. But for a guy that only been on the team for 3 or 4 days, I thought he actually did a pretty good job of just trying to pick things up on the fly. But you notice the difference when the offensive line looked a lot better when Whittington was in the game. And all of a sudden, when the same offensive line was in there, they didn't look as good when Pitzenberger or Owen Wright was in the game. So that's where we stand. The combined practice versus the Raiders is tomorrow. Very excited about that, to get out there and see exactly how those guys fare versus a motivated Max Crosby. Max Crosby's getting into fights with his own quarterback. What do you think he's going to do to ours? But if he does, it's going to be a fight, because the Texans offensive line, they are reborn badass. For now, we'll see. They got to go out and actually perform, but they got a better attitude. Hey, if you haven't liked or subscribed yet, please do. And it helps other people in the Texans community find the Believe in Texans podcast. Very excited about this Raiders combined practice and game. And I will see you guys either late Thursday night or early Friday morning.